Welcome to TribTalk. I'm Jennifer Napier-Pierce with the Salt Lake Tribune. A federal agency is looking into discrimination complaints filed by a Salt Lake City school board member. And joining me to talk about the allegations and the investigation that's been initiated by the U.S. Department of Education's Office of Civil Rights is Salt Lake City school board member McKell, Clara, and he's here in the newsroom. And
this is Michael. I've paused the podcast because I just want to point out, I'm going to fast forward it through my part of the interview and just show the last part of my interaction with Jennifer Napier-Pierce, and then the balance of this will be with McKell Withers. I'm going to narrate and put in supplemental information on what he says because the truth is not his friend, and we deserve to have a little more explanation and context to what he's talking about.
It's great to have you back. Thank you so much for being on TribTalk again. Here's a comment, another comment on sltrib.com from someone named Jack Nasty. If there is discrimination, partisan Republican McKell Clara is the wrong messenger. His grandstanding may once again intimidate Salt Lake City School Board, but it won't play a part in creating a long-term solution to a serious problem. Are you looking at this for a long-term solution, or is this, as this person accuses, grandstanding? McKell Clara.
Well, yeah, you know what somebody may call grandstanding, I own that. I wouldn't know if I would call it grandstanding, but definitely the source of friction for me has been with Superintendent Withers, who is the leader of the bureaucracy. I come to the board as an elected official who is charged with making the budget and making policy, and then when there's a bureaucracy that just turns a blind eye to the issues facing my community, then I have an obligation, to shout that from the rooftops if I need to, and to get attention to solving this issue. Because the superintendent doesn't want to address it, doesn't relieve me of the responsibility that I have, towards my neighbors. I would betray them if I were to walk away like he has on some of these issues. So they definitely have to be addressed, and if some people interpret that as grandstanding, I'm okay with that.
What kind of remedy are you seeking?
Well, the remedy would be to look at other alternatives to, not be so punitive. We actually have a really good program, the peer court, within our own district. I think we need to take more advantage of that. It seems like the district, at least my perception is that they're just in a paralysis because they don't know how to solve this, and so their answer is just to hope, that nothing is going to happen, or that if we ignore it, it'll go away, and that's just not going to, as long as I'm here, we're not going to ignore it. We're going to address it, and there are solutions out there. One is to get the police officers out of the schools and replace them with adults that can help modify that behavior for our students and not criminalize, their behavior.
So you want more alternatives like peer court, like using horizonte as a last resort. Is that kind of what you're hoping for?
Right, and no police officers in the schools. The police officers should be there to respond to criminal behavior and criminal activity, not juvenile misbehavior or breaking of school rules.
Salt Lake City School Board member McKell Clara, thank you so much for being with us. I appreciate your time.
Thank you.
And again, you can join us if you've got questions and comments. Please send those to the hashtag at TribTalk on Twitter. You can put your comments right here on the website, or you can send us a text to that number on the screen. Salt Lake City School Superintendent McKell Withers joins us now. He's here in the newsroom. And Superintendent, great to have you as well. Thank you so much for your time.
Thanks, Jennifer and Ben. Appreciate your interest in this topic that's been, in the conversations to better represent all young people for well over 40 or 50 years.
You've listened to what McKell Clara had to say, the claims that the OCR is going to be looking into. Your general reaction to this investigation?
Sure. Let me give a context. The Office of Civil Rights, we have a great relationship with them. We look forward to any insights that they might have. We've worked with them on a number of requests in the past. So when they get a complaint, they will ask for information. That's the phase that we're in at this point. They received a complaint. They've asked for information about a number of things that they'll then look at and then determine whether or not there are issues that need to be corrected. But let's talk about disproportionality, and let's talk about young people in schools. And I appreciate that Mr. Clara mentioned peer court and Horizonte and prevention efforts. I grew up in the community that he's talking about. I went to South High School. That's no longer in the inventory, and Glendale is talked about in a couple of different contexts. Sometimes it comes up when you're looking at criminal records. Sometimes it comes up when you're looking at school discipline. And those are the things that I'd be happy to give a background on and then be able to talk specifically about any other concerns. Do you want me to keep going, or do you have questions, or what would be most helpful?
Well, let's start with Michael Clara's suggestion that the district has really turned a blind eye to this problem. I mean, what are the policies that you have in place to ensure that discipline is truly colorblind?
Colorblind is an offensive term to lots of folks because you want to pay attention to differences so that you see when things are inappropriate and you can then address them. So we have the most robust data system in the state of Utah.
All right, I'm going to have to jump in here and disagree with him. When it comes to the suspension data, they don't have the most robust data in the state of Utah. In fact, the information that they gave to the Office of Civil Rights, they underreported the suspensions. And they tell us, you know, they told us in several meetings why that is. In one of the recent school board meetings last year, it was because there's Power School and there's Educators Handbook, and even in this memo here that we got in last year kind of explains the difference that, you know, you put some of the information in Power School, some of the information in Educators Handbook, but they're working on it. You know, they're going to get this taken care of. You know, but here's a memo on this program, you know, that's over a decade old, and it looks like, you know, they're still working on it. So this is bizarre. I don't get, you know, where they're coming from, and there's really nothing robust about having fake data.
Mr. Clara is even a member of our minority advocacy committee, so he's aware of the efforts that are in place and the progress that's been made. He's aware of the changes that have occurred. He talked about some positive things that he's seen, and so.
All right, so I'm going to have to jump in here again. This is a picture of Curtis Linton, Archie Archuleta, and myself taken in June of last year. The meeting that he's referring to is the Equity Leadership Team meeting, and this is a group that I insisted be reignited. The district had established this with Kathleen Christie back in 2008, and then by 2011 they stopped meeting. And so it was, you know, in my insistence in the January last year meeting, this group reconvened, and we kind of had a rocky start, but then we started meeting consistently, and we are addressing issues. But this is happening in spite of the superintendent and not because of him. Here is the June 3rd, 2014 school board meeting where the board president is saying she has no idea what equity leadership team meetings are.
Kind of an ongoing, do we have a consensus around, we have one around orange and tan. Right. That everyone was right in there. I think with Janet has prepared these for us. So let's jump right into it. Thank you,
Christy?
Janet. Yes.
While you're passing that out, can I just say, add on to Heather, you know, what you said was accurate, but also there was a solution, is what I was proposing, that came from the last equity leadership team, was trying to have somebody on the district level just coordinate some of these.
But I think that's what Kathleen Christie does.
Yeah. That's Kathleen's job.
I think that's Kathleen's
job. I mean, the whole equity team, that's their job. That's why they were created, that whole department.
Right, but that's what we're saying in these community meetings, that that's not working.
Well, so let's have further discussion.
Yeah, we'll have
we have
further
another equity
another
team meeting on Thursday.
It's Thursday.
And
Right.
some of us didn't get the message about the last meeting on the 22nd.
Okay.
And also, my question back out is, you know, what is this committee?
Mm-hmm.
What's our role on this committee? I mean, none of us even knew about this, that we were even a part of this committee.
Yeah, I didn't know either. I didn't know if we were invited or we just information.
Exactly. So we'll have more discussion about it.
Okay.
Thank you. All right, Janet.
The only difference in this version is going to be the date at the top.
And then also the items that
those are certainly there, and you can talk about that in terms of discipline, where you're looking at support to help young people. So there are kids that sometimes act out because of the circumstances of their life. Then there are sometimes kids that act out because they make poor choices. Sometimes there are kids that get caught because their friends set them up, and then they get noticed and discipline follows them. The real concern related to the court system. And so these are complex issues that are overlapping. So let me try and simplify a couple of those. So when you think about a young person who does something significant enough that it could result in a citation or court action, the concern is that if it was just something dumb and that then gets stacked on top of other events, the likelihood for that young person to end up with poor solutions and head towards prison rather than early intervention and prevention start to go up, that he's down the wrong path. But at the same time, there are some young people in abusive situations that the court is the way they get rescued, the way they get help, the way they end up in foster care. So having different agencies collaborate and work in the schools is real important.
All right, so I'm pausing this to jump in here again. This is part of McKell's technique. He does this in board meetings when you ask a question or you're looking for information. If it's an issue they want to avoid, then he goes off and explains something totally different. It's you know, not you know, a deception on what he's saying. What he's saying is the truth, but it's not answering the question. And that's kind of what he's done here. He goes off into these other issues that he's explaining, but he's missing the point here in terms of the subject at hand. Here's a copy of the disproportionate minority contact arrest and referral assessment that was done in September 2012. And then here's the data that I put in my complaint. I'm not going to go into it here, but this is really the issue at hand that we're talking about. And yeah, the courts can help. Coordinating with agencies is good, but that's not the issue that we're talking about. We're talking about this data and how it disproportionately affects ethnic minority students because there's a full-time officer at Glendale and at Northwest, and that's why they have more arrests there.
Resource officers, boy, they started in the 70s. When I was a student at South High School, I remember a resource officer there at South High, and they were hired with the intent to build relationships and try to stop the progression in the court system. No police officer should ever enforce what is an administrative function for a school district personnel.
But pardon me, can I ask if they are? You said they should not. Maybe that's the ideal. But are these school resource officers, are they in the disciplinary phase?
No, but what will occur circumstantially? Let's say that a fight breaks out in a school and the administrators break up the fight, but as they collect information about what occurred, was that then potentially an assault and not a fight? Did it have some gang affiliations and not just a common fight? So then you're sorting that out, and if it leads to citations, then the resource officer certainly would act on that and investigate further. But if it's a simple conflict, then no, the officer is not involved at all. They don't issue the disciplinary action, nor do they call the parent, nor do they have the conference, nor do they have any involvement in extracurricular activities or what goes on in the school.
So just to be clear, juvenile detention, a last resort option for the most extreme and perhaps violent cases that you're dealing with when it comes to student misbehavior?
Juvenile court detention would never even be on a list of any school's disciplinary plan. It's not something that schools do.
All right, so I'm pausing this and jumping in here because that's a bit odd what he just said, because when I look at policy S3 and look at the administrative procedures associated with that, which is called administrative procedure, student conduct and discipline. And then as I sort through this and I go to B7, it says that the school shall establish procedures for school counselor or other designated school representative to work with the student in order to attempt to resolve the student's disruptive behavior before the student becomes subject to the jurisdiction of juvenile court. And then here we see in C4, a student to whom habitual disruptive a student to whom a habitual disruptive student behavior citation is issued shall be referred to juvenile court. And then C5, within 5 days after the citation is issued, the school administration shall provide documentation to the parent and the court of efforts made by the school to resolve the student's disruptive behavior. And then C6, the district coordinator will coordinate with the juvenile court in providing other information as needed. So I don't know what he's referring to when he says that.
You have in-school and out-of-school suspension. And ideally, if the parents have the time and the parents and the school personnel are on the same page, out-of-school suspension is the best way to intervene, because you're able to have a conference, a timeout, you come back to school and ready to go. But it's ironic that in the past, sometimes out-of-school suspension, it's the only place I know where schools used to have out-of-school suspension as a consequence for sloughing school. So it's the only place I know where the crime and the punishment were identical. You send a kid home for missing school, that doesn't make any sense. And so schools have developed in-school suspension and preventative strategies to intervene much earlier. So this data on disproportionality, Mr. Clara mentioned the DMC group. We've been working with them for years in recognizing that there are places throughout Utah and across the country where you have 5 times greater referrals for kids that are from diverse backgrounds than Anglo kids. That's not the case in the city. There's still some disproportionate situations that emerge, and those need to be identified and studied and then addressed. Data is your friend when you take a look at things that you think you're handling equitably and then find out you're not. Again, that's what the district does and does well, is look at that data, inform practice, bring professionals together, and make changes. The number of young people that are referred for safe school hearings has dropped dramatically over the last few years. So those are all part of this broad, more complex issue.
Okay, well, what about to the point that there are 2 school resource officers in West Side schools, Glendale and Northwest Middle Schools, but the 3 East Side middle schools don't have any law enforcement on the campus?
The entry of resource officers onto school sites was back in, like I mentioned, the 70s in the high schools. If you follow then questions and responses that were made at local levels, the 2 middle schools that were mentioned by Mr. Clara, Glendale and Northwest, they sought and paid for the resource officers to come to their own schools many, many years ago. It's at least in the 90s, maybe even before that. It's only our intervention at the district level in the last few years, trying to be more equitable and fair, that we've tried to find ways to cover every school with a resource officer. Again, back to safety and security and proactive behavior. So we worked with the police department a few years back to add a 2nd officer in the high schools, so that those officers then had time to go down to the other middle schools and the elementary schools. Ideally, every middle school would have a full-time officer. And you said East Side, West Side. Bryant Middle School demographically is no different than Northwest or Glendale. So it's right there off of 7th East and 1st South. It's a very urban school like the other 2, but chose not to, years and years ago, pay for their own officer. Now we look for ways to leverage grants and resources to cover as many schools as possible. And as you mentioned earlier, we have many, many parents and patrons that wished we had an officer in our elementary schools. Well, it's the high school officers that, because there's a team there, that can free up a little bit of time to cover and be proactive in the other middle schools and all of the elementary schools.
I apologize, my audio was out while you were giving your initial statement, so maybe you've covered this already, but what to Mr. Clara's claim that the district sends a higher proportion of minority students to Horizonte, the alternative high school?
Okay, you don't send students to Horizonte, you have to want to go there.
All right, I'm breaking in here. So what she's referring to is in the OCR complaint, they state the district discriminates against minority students by disproportionately assigning minority high school students to Horizonte Instructional and Training Center based on their race and national origin. And McKell knows that's not true, what he just said, that you have to want to go there. Here's the webpage for Horizonte. This past summer, About 100 Hispanic students received this letter in June, and it says here that your student will be completing high school at Horizonte and will be able to finish all coursework and credits required for graduation. Horizonte has been informed that your student is being referred to their school. Only about a fourth of these students that got the letter showed up at Horizonte when it started this year. So there's no choice about it. He's just, again, fabricating things for public relations purposes. In a second, he's going to talk about the population and try to mix it up. You have to look at all this other stuff, but the reality is student population for the district of Hispanic students, 41%. At Horizonte, it's 65% Hispanics attend.
That's really important, but Horizonte is also an adult education center, so there's a very, very robust and successful refugee program there at Horizonte along with the adult program. So you would expect the demographics to match that incredibly rich diversity of the city, but it's also additional ethnic minority representation because of the refugee adults that are also on that site. I do believe that Mr. Clara is right, that there are young people in poverty and young people in some ethnic minority groups that have less success in traditional settings than they should have. And that's a high priority. We have Highland High School's graduation rate has been higher for Hispanic students than Caucasian students. So sometimes there's stories that are told and the data is very different than the stories that are told.
What about to the claim that Mr. Clara himself was discriminated against by the district by positioning a campus cop right next to him during school board meetings? Was that discrimination?
The security at the public board meeting has not changed before nor since.
Wow, so I don't think this man could tell the truth if his life depended on it. But just like some of the other statements he's made, many of the statements he's made throughout this interview just simply are not true. In this case, the security, the SRO that was stationed at the board is gone. That's why I stopped dressing like a bandito, because my commitment was that I was going to dress like the Frito Bandito as long as that police officer was there looking at me, and he's gone. They moved him out, and the attorney for the school board called me and let me know that he would be gone. And I didn't have to dress like the Frito Bandito anymore. So, and McKell knows that. And now they have hired a private security to be at the meeting. So what he just said, like many of the previous statements he has made in this interview, just are fibs again. And that's putting it in a very nice as I know how, without calling him
There's still one officer there at the public board meetings. The positioning was changed. Change for multiple reasons, not just those that Mr. Clara has brought up, and there is still an armed officer at board meetings today. So the need for security at those public meetings is well known in every setting. I had to go through security to get in your building today. So those things are in place. As to the complaint and the dispute about the facts, I can't speak to any allegations about threats that have been made, but I do know that there are multiple individuals that have felt intimidated, threatened, and bullied by Mr. Clara, and have been very clear about that.
Yeah, you mentioned that you have a long-standing relationship with the state agency that gathers data with law enforcement. Were the concerns about inequity in discipline and the allocation of campus cops something that you were thinking about currently? I suppose the question is, if Mr. Clara had not brought up these concerns, if an investigation wasn't launched, I mean, would the district be proactively addressing these issues?
Have been proactively addressing them. Like he did mention, Mr. Clara mentioned that it seems difficult to try and make some progress in these areas. I think that's a fair comment, that there seem to be persistent communities. We've made progress that's measurable. I've mentioned safe school hearings have dramatically decreased over the last few years because of what's called multi-tiered system of support. You're trying to help young people stay out of disciplinary responses, out of the court system, and help them develop skills and strategies to be more competent and successful. From my view, that's part of being college and career ready, that you want to be able to fully participate in society, not only academically and socially, but civically as well. You don't want doors shut on you. So there are lots of stories that I've heard, and I think there's some truth to this as well, that you'll hear stories of things that happen in smaller communities that might seem outrageous in an urban center. I remember one rural superintendent telling me once when he was a kid, he rode a horse through the hallways of his school when he was a senior in high school. Man, if you were to do that in a city school, I'm sure you would end up before a judge. That's not a funny thing to do, but at the same time, it's treated differently in different communities. That's where you have to be careful when young people are referred to court, that court is to help and not to misidentify young people, because if kids get the belief that there's no hope, hope makes all the difference in the world. But if they believe there's no hope and that they're mischaracterized and they're criminalized, then why not go do more of that? Because I've been there, I've done that, at least I have some friends there. There's no question that inappropriately moving young people into a court system is not helpful at all to their future. So you have to be more proactive. Ms. Clara again mentioned peer court, something we support completely and that we've developed in very thoughtful ways in terms of restorative justice and having young people help young people be successful.
So other than peer court, are there specific measures you are exploring at this point to sort of remedy at least some of the allegations that have been made, or are you going to wait until the results of the investigation?
We never wait. The investigation is just collecting the same kind of data that we look at all the time, but you want to point out sometimes there are blind spots that schools don't recognize, and someone needs to point that out. You maybe have heard the term of equity audits. There are different ways to describe those and what those mean, but you take a look at what's actually going on. So OCR is going to collect.
All right, so I'm going to jump in here again. That is really odd that he would bring up equity audits. They actually weren't doing them for the last several years until I pressed them on it and insisted that we start doing equity audits. So now we are, but we weren't doing them prior to my service on the board. So I think it's odd that he brings this up as though it was something they were already doing. I had to do a grammar request and threaten them with some things in order to get them back on track with the equity audits. And here's a meeting that we talked about it.
The Utah Consolidated Application, the UCA.
Yeah.
Michael, you asked to have that moved to action.
Right.
So first, let me have a motion for this item, and then we can have a discussion.
I move to approve the Utah Consolidated Achievement Plan 2014-15.
Thank you. May I have a second?
Second.
A second? All right, discussion.
So I had asked to move it because when we talk about like achievement gap disparities, when it talks about it, one of the things that I see happening is that there seems to be a lot of, I wouldn't say inconsistency, but there's different ways that each schools are approaching this. And I've been involved in a couple community meetings where the discussion has revolved around, trying to get consistency across the district. And so I wrote a letter here just spelling out one of the recommendations that, the last meeting that I was at was with the equity leadership team. So one of the recommendations that they gave in an effort to kind of solve this like achievement gap disparities, for example, coming back here to
This is 1.4 that you're looking at? Achievement gap disparities?
Yeah, well, like if I look at like 1.4.4, for example, when it talks about conduct equity audits at various district programs and practices, since I've been on the board, I haven't seen an equity audit. And then when I ask for them, they're not, I don't know where they're at or if they're available. The next one talks about 1.4.
Systemically for our district, they've done that across the whole country. There's a new national report that should come out this fall that's a much more thoughtful, deeper way to try and collect and compare what's happening with discipline across the country. It's called the CRDC, Civil Rights Data Collection Program. So when we find a school that seems to have disproportionate referrals to a safe school committee or disproportionate referrals for suspensions. You point that out to that school and say, man, it looks like something's going on here, that there are more Hispanic kids or more Polynesian kids than Asian kids. Why is that? Is there something going on with poverty or family circumstance? Is there something going on with the biases or discrimination in school? And if so, how do we address that and change that? Again, that equity leadership team that Mr. Clara is a member of is fully engaged in that work and has done a great job moving forward in that area. But there are parts of those changes. When you take a look at data, you can account for almost all of the differences academically for kids related to poverty, but there's still additional differences. So that has to be about expectations. So if the adults don't have the same high expectations for all kids, those differences start to get deeper and bigger. And so you have to have the same expectations for success, same expectations for figuring things out, the same expectations that disciplinary actions are only helpful if they correct the behavior. If they lead to deeper and harsher punishments, then it didn't work, right? You're trying to find ways to, again, stop the progression, not enhance it.
Ben, what's the next step in this federal probe? And what happens if they do find that Mr. Clara's claims are substantiated?
What's next is a little unclear. There's no set timeline for when they expect to be completed with the investigation. As far as what will likely happen, the OCR, they would not describe themselves as a punitive entity. Their goal is to look for areas of improvement and encourage that improvement. They do possess the threat of withheld funding as a carrot or a stick, depending on how you want to look at it. But it's far more likely that if they find improvement is needed, they will make suggestions to the district and encourage mediation between the various groups.
Okay. We're out of time. Benjamin Wood, McKell Withers, thank you very much, gentlemen, for your time today.
Thank you.
Thank you, Jen.
You can find more on education right here at sltrib.com. Thanks so much for tuning into Trib Talk today. We'll see you next time.